Okay, I'm just going to save a little copy of this and see how well it goes because I'm a little out of practice. Okay, here we go. So anthropology is its own profession within academia. It is not just something that we do in just one continent or one small area of the world. It's a fairly recent academic focal point, as are actually things like the term biology and so forth. So what we're going to do is just real quickly compare contrast what it is we do that makes us distinct from other social or behavioral sciences, and that would include also some of the life sciences. So, and then specifically, and this is where your reading in chapter 1 takes up in a little more intensity, what is all the variable things that are looked for or looked at with biological anthropology? And the big concept of Unit 1 in particular, but it will linger with us for the entire rest of the course, is what is the scientific process or method, and how is that used within not just our course, but in everything that anthropology does in specific. All right, in general. When somebody gets a degree or works within anthropology, whether that is as a student or later on in your profession, our concept of how we're going to do this work and the purpose of it is for it to incorporate these 4 perspectives constantly. We do not accept that with anthropology, the study of humans, humanity, humans as a species, humans culturally, human language, all those things, that we will ever get to important understanding or important usefulness of this approach unless what we are doing is global. So that would be your first just key concept right here. Anthropology is a global perspective. If we are a global perspective, then that means that there must be many of us in the field who constantly, when we get data from one particular period in time or data from a particular language group in a particular setting, or data from a population in one part of the world versus another, that we are going to do our research and set up our explanations thinking comparatively. It isn't a hyper-focused approach only at one question, one moment, one culture, one point in time. So when we do this, we are looking to constantly remember that we want to have a holistic perspective. So this again, holism, H-O-L-I-S-T-I-C, is a little bit related to what we think about in a different spelling of a concept like W-H-O-L-E, that this is going to have to incorporate all that we can get information, experiences, or data for. And then the last one is anthropology recognizes it's not something that has something specific to do with certain researchers at one decade or certain researchers in one culture or country or researchers personally. This is about the entire profession as we collect observations, data, analysis that's global, comparative, and holistic. We recognize that when we're looking at humans, that we must use an evolutionary perspective. We will more specifically define evolutionary, though, in our general public. Sometimes we'll see some folks use these terms, but in a different manner, one that is not actually used professionally or scientifically. Okay, so these are our 4 things we're going to look at quickly: global, comparative, holistic, and evolutionary. Okay. And again, anybody that's logging in a little bit more recently, please go ahead and sign in on chat. All right, global. So essentially, there's nothing difficult to grasp about this, just need it to be our starting point for how we're going to look at things from the rest of the semester. Our starting point here is that we do accept that we won't really understand what humanity is, humanness is, human species like genus Homo and our ancestors, unless we are looking to collect data on any dimension of this: genetics, lifeways, belief systems, whatever it is that an individual researcher is looking at more specifically for everybody, everywhere, and over all phases of human existence. So we do not think within this particular perspective that will ever be enough to only look at a single segment of humanity or only the most recent human species and think then that we are defining what humans are. That won't be, right? Won't give us all the perspectives, dimensions, and understanding that we would need. So in other words, just saying, if we were just doing one segment saying, oh, humans right now, what are our genetics right now? That's all we need to know. That's just one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Disciplines that do not have a global perspective, but do study humans. Are important. They have many uses for the research they do or the results they collect. But when they are not global, they cannot work effectively, either to answer questions or help people or satisfy other curiosities or interests or needs for the whole planet or humans over all dimensions of time. So for instance, we have many psychology majors, not just in community colleges, but in every university. And it is an important and useful perspective or profession for humans. But psychology, when you learn about doing psychology, that will help you to be able to work with your own society. If you are, there are a few things about scientifically about, for instance, how fast babies develop in their ability to maybe control muscles and then begin to understand or make speech, and a few other things that are genetic, and they're going to work more or less globally. But for most of what's going on for us in our own lives as individuals, the training that you get, the research that you learn about, the studies, the examples, all that sort of stuff, it works just one point in time for one particular type of culture. Economics is the same. While economics can look at the whole planet in some ways, or just look at something that's more local, economics really can only work with societies that are using symbolic elements of money and investment. So it is something super important, but there's a period in history where there's nothing they can say economically with any large details from their particular point of view. History is the same. History doesn't require scientific data over things. History has a different approach, and history then therefore only works with societies that left writing that we can decipher. History doesn't use science specifically, so that's why history is not in math, science, engineering. It's not in behavioral sciences in most larger grouping of things. It is going to be in its own realm of studies, usually with art and communication and a few other things like that, and political science the same. These are helpful, super helpful, but not going to give us answers about everybody all over the place because they're not global perspectives. So for instance, if you become a really motivated and gifted sociologist after your training here in, let's say, North America, while you can really help groups, right? Because psychology is about individuals and sociology is about groups. You really can help groups, segments of your societies, other things that are important. However, if you go to another continent, you can be good-willed, but you won't really have the specific information you need to actually help them at the level they need to be assisted, if they need assistance, right? That's just assuming that everybody does. All right, next one, comparative. Comparative is once we look at things globally or over time, and actually anthropology with one of its subfields, archaeology, is the only academic perspective on the planet that can look at humans from the very beginning of being able to extract some data from the fossil record or from other things that we can find elsewhere. So anthropological research isn't complete until we do those comparisons from one culture, one region, or one time frame to another. So what we're looking for here when anybody or any of your courses or any of your research things that you're looking at, when we are looking at it this way, we're using this idea of looking for pattern. Is there a way that if you end up in one particular type of, let's say, food production strategy, is there certain things that happen similarly all over the planet for people that end up using that particular food production strategy? So we're looking for patterns. But the big one here in our course is pattern means you have to collect data, and data must be quantifiable. So we're going to be ringing that bell a lot in these first 3 weeks, and then it will still come up for the rest of the course. So quantifiable. Quantifiable meaning you have to get countable, collectible, empirical data. So quantifiable or pattern is really how scientific data is collected and analyzed. It has to be something that if one person collected this information, data, measurements, and so forth, that someone else who does not know them, doesn't work with them, might not even really like the first researcher or first group, can go in and repeat the same observations, data collection, and come up with something, a measurable relationship that can be compared. So comparative. And then last one here, holistic. Holism means that we can't just decide, and we learn not to overrank just one thing or another for the whole field. That doesn't mean individual researchers don't focus on one primary aspect that they're interested in or that they're doing data collection for. But every aspect of human society matters. And from an anthropological perspective, then, we must constantly remind ourselves that even if it does seem that one thing is the thing that we are hearing or seeing or noticing personally the most, it is directly related to all the activities, beliefs, environmental, practices, strategies, and so forth that go along within that entire society. And so anthropologically, one of the really very interesting, very helpful, and very helpful for planning for the future activities that we do is to collect information and think about it consciously, constantly, that if changes occur in one area of a culture, for instance, the way marriage patterns go, then other functional parts of that society, for instance, their economy, will be affected. A quick example of this, not the purpose of our course per se, but something that probably most of you at least have heard a little bit if you haven't looked at it more. We've had a few situations in the last few decades. Humans have been around for millions of years, so a few decades is like a quick time. A few decades where certain parts of the world have decided from a central authority of the society that humans in that culture must follow rules about how many children they can have, and that there will be strong penalties if you violate those rules. We've seen that happen in a few places, and I'm not going to point a figure at that because it's not where we're headed for the whole course. But what did we see from those societies within 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years after getting nearly every single person in their society to be under the rule where you may only have one child, or maybe in some cases two, but not more than that. And then you'll be severely fined or punished in some other areas. So one of the things that we saw for one of those regions was, for the first time noticeably ever, childhood obesity. For another one, for the first time ever, children that didn't have a full range of social behaviors and comfort. And another one, especially longer down the road, 20 years down the road, real issues with how people in the society could find a marriage partner when they didn't have all that many individuals to choose from. So it really changed everything going down the road. So taking a look at this holistic perspective is really, really important anthropologically. And it really helps us to see the kinds of things that we might do in our societies today, and what some of the unhighlighted outcomes of those are going to be. Why was there childhood obesity? It was a society where everybody had lots of kids, and it was really loving their kids like we do and so forth. But when there was only maybe one baby at the time, then you had a lot of adults, cousins, and so forth, just right, trying to be the most popular, loving the kid, making the kid happy. And that had to do with a lot of treats and activity, but yet less exercise because there were fewer kids to play with in the household. Very interesting. Okay, and then the last one for our course in general, this evolutionary perspective. Now, evolution, you all, really just simply means change. Can we document change? It's not directional. It isn't only if the change makes a huge difference, not a small one. Evolution just means change over time. That's all that it means. Now, we have lots of social discourse, sometimes arguments, sometimes agreements, and that sort of thing going on. We're super aware of it in some parts of the world, maybe not so much something that people are arguing about at the moment. But most of the time in those arguments, some or many of the people participating are not defining evolution in the same way or in a way that's academically accurate. So change, if we're looking to understand change, then we need to be able to collect data on how that change is occurring, when that change seems to be triggered, or when it's slowing up, or when it's really going along, and then why. What was it that changed in order to make some particular genetics, process, strategy, belief system start to go and make a small turn in another direction? Okay, so evolution. What is change? And how can we document that? All right, so one last one here, and then we'll call this one good for us today. All right, biological anthropology then for our course. Super wide-ranging, interdisciplinary field that uses evolution as the foundation for understanding the place of humans in the natural world. So remember again, evolution means recognizing that there are changes, there will be changes, we can document them, and in some cases, we can get direct evidence for instance, the genetic code for those particular changes. When we think that everything's going to stay the same for a long period of time, or that some cultures in the world have never changed, that's an interesting one. I hear it sometimes in things that are sort of for the general public, or other kinds of conversations where they say, well, this culture's never changed in 10,000 years. That's super, super racist. Ask those people and they will tell you all of the changes that they recognize, that they're going through, that they need to make, that they didn't accept, and so on and so forth. All right. I'm going to